Hey, it's Nobody, and welcome to the channel, guys. I just wanted to do a quick video on the Tanchjim Hana, the OG version that I believe came out in about the year 2020, so it's ancient as far as IEMs go. But, I just think that it didn't really get its flowers. There were some notable reviewers that did do videos on this, but, as far as a hyped set, I don't think the Tanchjim Hana OG was that hyped. But this is a set that I hold very near and dear to my heart, for a few reasons, which we'll get into. So without further ado, let's get it. I think the first thing that I really enjoyed about this set, and was probably the most apparent as soon as I put it in my ears, was just how well the technicalities present themselves on this set. As far as imaging goes, this was the first set that I ever experienced the quote-unquote 3D imaging. I remember exactly what song I was listening to. It was Clever by Erykah Badu, and I just remember just having these little so there's like some keys on the track, and I just remember them just kind of rotating around my head, and it was the first time that I ever heard like sounds like psychoacoustically coming from behind me while listening to an IEM. And ever since that moment, I was hooked. So yeah, this video is just gonna be, I think I'm gonna call it my love letter to the Tanchjim Hana. And so basically, that's the first thing I noticed, was the technicalities. The second thing I noticed was the tuning itself, and just how fun it is, because to be honest, I'm more of a neutral head, I guess you could say. And it used to be just straight up flat neutral, I guess you could call it. I feel like as time goes by, there's always like a new version of neutral in the IEM world. If that makes sense. I think really what's popular now is neutral with a bass boost. And there's different styles. I think the one that I enjoy at the moment is like a neutral with sort of a more fun bass boost. For example, something like the Thea Audio Hype 4, or the Kiwi Airs Orchestra Light. That's something that I'm really into at the moment as far as tuning, but that's besides the point. We're getting a little off track here. So the tuning on this IEM I would describe as a mild V shape. There's definitely some emphasis in the bass, there's some emphasis in the treble, but the reason I call it a mild V shape is because I don't think it overdoes it. It's very, very well done. As far as the bass, let's start with the bass. I would say it's a little bit boosted past neutral, and I'll throw up the graph, but yeah, the sub bass is sort of on a downward slope, and then it sort of reaches its peak in the mid bass, and it's quite nice. I would say it's actually fairly clean, and I guess you could say that it as far as like tracks go, it does sort of just in its replay represent what the mix of the song has as far as bass goes. But the way the bass is, it's very fast, it's very clean, and it's really enjoyable. And as far as the lower mid-range, again, it's a V shape, so that lower mid-range is slightly scooped out, but because it's, you know, not too extreme, it's sort of the lower mid-range at times peeks through. It's enough to get by. There are some sets where, some V-shaped sets where, you know, it's very noticeable that like the lower mid-range is scooped out, and if you don't like that, well, you're just not gonna like that. But if you do enjoy mid-range, this has enough to get by, and that's something that, you know, sort of shaped my taste towards V-shaped sets going forward, because it's like you can have a little bit of mid-range and you can have a little bit of fun in the tuning, and you know, as far as V-shaped sets go, that's sort of the direction that I enjoy the most personally. And then when we're getting up to that upper mid-range, I feel like this is also where the fun comes in. It's definitely got sort of an interesting tuning, and I feel like it's intentional. I don't think it was something, you know, that Tanchjim sort of didn't really know if they were doing. I'm pretty sure they knew exactly what they were doing. And yeah, I would say that the upper mid-range, more so than the treble, is where they put the most emphasis. And what that means is that, you know, female vocals, instruments that sit in that upper mid-range register are really gonna pop out. To be honest with you, I don't think this set has any trouble with male vocals, but for sure female vocals is definitely one of the main focuses, or one of the things that this set does very well. And as far as that mid treble, again, it is emphasized, but I think it is fairly smooth. You know, if you don't like a bright set, you may not like the Tanchjim Hana, but to me, I don't mind a bright set, and I think it's done quite well. And you know, it is quite smooth. I wouldn't say it's the most fatiguing set, you know, especially if you're used to that sort of brightness. Yeah, I don't think you're gonna have too much trouble with that. And the air frequencies are done quite well. Again, I think it's pretty smooth. You know, it's not something that really emphasizes like the S's and the T's to an unbearable amount. But yeah, and I feel like it does sort of fall, that air frequency sort of falls away, and it's decently extended. I didn't have anything that was like noticeably like, oh, I don't like noticeably like, geez, like I wish they added a little bit more air. I personally don't feel that way. I think it's quite well done. Now, the reason I have this set to the right here is because, well, the Tanchjim Hana is about 4 years old at this point, and it's discontinued AF. I mean, you guys probably have heard of the Tanchjim Hana 2021, aka I think it's just like a repackaged Tanchjim Oxygen. You know, I've never heard the Hana 2021 personally because I own the Tanchjim Oxygen, and it just seemed redundant to pick that set up. But that's besides the point. So the reason I have the C2 Mech by Tin Hi-Fi here is because unless you pick this up used, you won't be able to get it. And I think it was, I think they, like Shenzhen Audio had a fair amount of stock, because I bought this set last year, like right before, around like October, I think. And I think they sold out of it around Black Friday. So yeah, I haven't had this set for 4 years or anything. I'm pretty glad I picked it up, because this set definitely shaped the way I look at IEMs, because again, this is for a long time one of the best technically performing sets I owned. And this is where the C2 comes in, because if you wanted to try the Hana OG, the C2 is probably the closest IEM you can get, and it's like $35, maybe even cheaper. I haven't checked the price in a while. And surprisingly, they are very similar. So let's kind of go over the frequency response of the C2. It actually graphs with more bass, and it follows basically the same shape as the Hana OG. So let's start off with the sub and mid bass. Compared to the Hana, they really sound just about the same. The Hana's bass quality might be just a hair better, but when you think about the fact that like this is maybe a quarter of the price of what this retailed for when it was available, that's actually pretty amazing. And when we go into the lower mid-range, again, it graphs with a hair more lower mid-range, but again, they're very similar in the sense that although it is slightly scooped, a little bit of that lower mid-range just peeks through enough for you to, enough to get by. It's really not too bad. And if you're looking for, a mild V shape, I think this is definitely, something to consider, especially for the price. And yeah, let's get into the upper mid-range. So the upper mid-range and the presence region, it's not as aggressive as the Tanchjim Hana, but again, when you listen to them, going back and forth, there's really not that much of a difference. And I really do think it has to do with the mid treble, because they sort of peak in the same spot around the same dB. So that might be the contributing factor, although the upper treble graphs just a little bit, well, actually quite a bit more than the C2 on the Hana here. So to be honest, where these two sets differ the most is when you get into that air region. Now, the air region on this, it's more, and it's noticeably more actually, and it's not as smooth. That's probably the only thing. The S's and the T's on the C2, at certain points I found were a little bit overemphasized. And I just quickly went back and listened to an album. It's called Bonito Generation by the band Caro Caro Bonito. If you like hyperpop and very cute tracks, I recommend you check it out. But yeah, so it's definitely, as far as music goes, what I think these two play the best is sort of like EDM, electronic, hyperpop, stuff like that, regular pop music in general. Things like that are, definitely what these two sets are going to do best. Again, if you're listening to something that is very mid-range focused, maybe some folk acoustic or singer-songwriter or just anything that's, in that lane, you're definitely going to notice the scoop in the lower mid-range. And that's just the nature of any V-shaped set. But again, it can get you by, especially if you like that tuning. So to me, I'm happy that I picked this up. It's a cheap set. It's a good introduction into the mild V-shaped sound signature. And as far as technicalities go, this thing the C2 punches way above its price range. To be honest, the Hana OG is better, but it should be. But if we're saying how much better the Hana is, it's about that better. I'd say it's about that better. The imaging on this, it's not quite 3D, but it's really quite good. Honestly, out of any $40 set that I've listened to, this is probably the best as far as technicalities go. So, the Hana is probably about 10% better, but for the price that it used to retail at, which I think was about $180, it should be. So that's not really, to me, that's not really a reason not to check out the C2, especially for the price. And I think if you're used to sets around that price range, you're going to be blown away by the technicalities on this thing for sure. Now, let's say you want something a little bit more expensive, something that's in that mild V-shape sound signature, something that sort of does what the Hana does, but it's still in production and you can buy it new. Well, that's where the Moondrop Kato comes in. Now, I will say, as far as differences, the Kato is probably the most different out of these two as far as the Hana. So I also believe the Hana was sort of released as a competitor to the Kato. So I think Tanchjim was definitely trying to, keep it similar, but maybe, stand out in certain areas to sort of, get some of that market share. So let's start off with what is similar about these two sets. Let me pull up the graph here. So as far as bass goes, the Moondrop has a little bit more sub bass, has a touch more mid bass, and it definitely has a little bit more lower mid range, and it's noticeable. I say the bass on this in general is just a tiny bit cleaner, maybe a little bit more fast, but the bass on the Kato is quite enjoyable just because it's a little bit more bodied. And if that's something that you like a little bit more warmth, a little bit more body to your bass, I think the Kato is going to edge the Hana as far as the bass. But if you like something a little bit more fast, a little bit more clean, then you might prefer the Hana. But when we go into the lower mid-range, again, it adds a little bit more warmth, and although it's just a tiny bit more, it is noticeable when you're going back and forth and listening to these things. The Hana definitely is the brighter set. The Kato is definitely the warmer set. So if we're getting into that upper mid-range, again, the Hana is quite a bit more aggressive in its rise all the way into the presence region. But, you know, it's sort of a preference thing because the Kato comes off as a little bit smoother of a set, where the Hana comes off a little bit more bright, a little bit more emphasized. I wouldn't say aggressive because both of these sets are quite smooth, in my opinion. It's just that the Kato is going to be the smoother of the two. And when we get into the mid treble, and by the way, I'm pretty sure I do have the brass nozzles on. To me, there's not too much of a difference. I just like the way the brass nozzles look, so that's that. And you know, I personally haven't graphed these things. I'm literally just looking at SwigLink Super Reviews graphs. And I think for the most part, if you know how to read a graph, that's pretty much all you need to navigate the hobby. Really, one thing I want to focus on this channel is just emphasizing that if you just have basic knowledge, you don't have to have like all the answers about when it comes to reading the graph or why it is the way it is. You just need to have a basic understanding, and navigating the hobby and finding which set works for you is going to be that much easier. So as this channel goes on, I do want to sort of emphasize that a little bit more and hopefully just teach people the basics of reading a graph, because that's going to help you more than just listening to a set being hyped by a reviewer who maybe after they do the review, they don't listen to the set because they have sets that are like $1,000 and that's what they're kind of digging. So again, like within your price range, one of the most important things about navigating this hobby is about just learning how to read a graph, just the basics, and sort of comparing and contrasting reviews. I wouldn't say this is quite a review because this set's been out for like 3 years. This set's like 4 years old. So, I mean, like, this is nothing new. I just am a guy that looks at SquidLink a ton and figured, you know what, why not make some videos? Now, one of the most noticeable things about the Kato is going to be that mid treble and air region. It's a lot less than the Hana and also the C2. It's probably the least extended of all three sets here. And you know, you might like that, you might not. To be honest, when I want a smooth set, I still go back to the Kato every once in a while. I like sleeping in the Kato because it's very inoffensive, it's very smooth. Like, I'm not gonna wake up in the middle of a night if like a very sibilant track is being played. So that's one thing I like about the Kato, is that in general it's very smooth. You could want more extension, but to be honest, if you're just somebody who just wants enough extension where it's like, okay, it's good, it's fine, but you're not really a treble head, I think the Kato is probably going to be the best bet for you. And again, if I had to choose between the three of these, again, I just have, again, this video is going to be called A Love Letter to the Tanchjim Hana. It was the first set that I was like, oh my gosh, this is what this is what reviewers are talking about when they say like 3D imaging. And I'm really happy I picked this set up before it went out of stock and, you know, basically out of production. So the Kato and the Hana, as far as technicalities go, again, I'm gonna say the Hana edges it by just a little bit. And then, yeah, This is where I would rank them as far as technicalities go. As far as tunings go, again, I really enjoy the Hana. And yeah, I'd keep it that way. But if you're just looking for a starter to this sound signature, the C2 is valid. If you want something that's smooth, not inoffensive, I go with the Kato. And if you can find the Hana and you're interested in trying it out, I definitely think you should. So that's all I had today, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one.